I'm back with another review video. If you've seen my previous videos, then you know that we already covered like career theorists and human development theorists. And so in this video, I'm gonna focus more on family theorists and family counseling and family therapy and things of that nature. So one thing to remember, like as I'm going through this video, is that the previous theories that we've covered, like human development and things like that, some of those can apply to family therapy as well, but I'm not going to be reviewing the things that we've already covered. I'm just going to focus on family therapy because it's a good amount of material, but like I've done in the previous videos, I really am trying to just like condense it into the things that I feel like were most relevant for the exam. But of course, it is always helpful to study using different resources, never just study using one book, one study guide, one video, because it's good to get things from different people, different resources, and everything like that. Okay, so I am gonna go ahead and get started. And also at the end of this video, I'm going to talk about like some things that I'm going to be doing in my future videos. I'm going to save that for the end. So for now, I'm going to just go ahead and get started. Okay, so something to remember and be aware of when you're reviewing your family therapy theorists and family therapy in general is the shift that in thinking that the counselors we're making from individual to family therapy. So in individual therapy, initially the psychopathology was very focused on the individual. It wasn't a whole lot of focus on the different social contexts of their lives. But in the shift to family therapy, a lot of practitioners began focusing on the family unit and how pathology was present in the family unit, and because of the relationships in the family, that really impacted the behavior of the individuals. So that is a very big shift in the way that practitioners were thinking. Something else that also changed was the kind of linear way of thinking. So like linear causality and circular causality. So in linear causality, it was like, okay, this one thing caused something else to happen, it's like a domino effect, right? But in circular, it looks at everything as interconnected and everything influences what's happening. So like an example for linear, you could see, say you have a client and they're very upset because they have been gaining weight. So you say, okay, what caused you to gain weight? Well, I've been eating more and I'm snacking more. And so you're snacking more, you're gaining weight, you're unhappy. It's looking at things in that kind of view. But for circular, it's looking at, okay, well, why are you eating more? Because you're stressed. You eat when you're stressed, right? That's what some people do. I'm stressed, so I'm eating more. That's causing me to gain weight. It's making me feel unhappy. So what do I do when I'm unhappy and I'm stressed? I eat more, and the cycle just keeps going and keeps going. So those are also two things that kind of change when you're looking at family system theories. And a couple other things to note. You want to be aware of like the cultural differences in the families that you're treating, because different cultures have different practices and different beliefs, and that is really going to influence the family that you're seeing. So really paying attention to what the beliefs are for that specific family, so that way the theory or techniques that are being used are specifically tailored to them and to their needs. And the last little kind of side note is that you also want to be aware of like the different family structures. So you have like your normal family structures and your alternative family structures. So whether it's like mom, dad, 2 kids, or single mom, single dad, 2 moms, 2 dads, non-binary parent, whatever the case may be, that is something that you also want to be aware of. So I'm going to start with these psychodynamic theories. or theorists. And the first one I'm going to start with is Nathan Ackerman. He was a very influential person in the family therapy movement. He really advocated for treating the entire family unit, not just the individual who was displaying symptoms. He really believed that in order to create change in the individual, you have to create change in the unit. So he was a very, very major player when it comes to like family therapy being what it is today. And he also has, like, he set up the Ackerman Family Institute, or Ackerman Institute for Families in like the 1960s. And that's something that's still around today. The journal that he created is still around today, still very much used. So that is Ackerman. Again, psychodynamic. So when you think of psychodynamic, you should automatically kind of be thinking of Freud, right? So they had shared similar kind of beliefs. Okay, so the other psychodynamic theorist is James Framo, however you pronounce his last name. And he focused a lot more on the kind of intergenerational family issues, and he believed that a troubled child stems from a troubled marriage, or parents who were in a troubled marriage. So he also focused a lot on object relations approaches. So he really emphasized the relationships between people and how that impacts not just their behaviors, but their interpersonal relationships as well. So next is the experiential counselors or therapists, and the main one that I'm going to focus on is Carl Whitaker. He was kind of existential, and he really believed that anxiety was a huge like driving force, a huge factor in the decisions that we make, the relationships that we have, and how we interact with people. He also believed that symptoms were a distraction, that the symptoms were a distraction from the existential problems or existential crises that the clients were facing. So he didn't focus so much on treating symptoms as he focused on kind of resolving whatever existential crisis the client was going through. So as an existential therapist, like we said, he focused a lot on anxiety. He also focused on a sense of like freedom and responsibility. So really emphasizing that through anxiety and through stress, clients have the ability to choose how they respond in these situations. They have the ability and responsibility to choose to either grow through these situations or become stagnant and kind of regress in a way. He was also very present focused, and a big like therapeutic goal for him was for clients to be able to experience themselves more openly and less defensively, and just kind of lead that more authentic life. So next we're going to go into the humanistic approaches, and for this one the main person you should know is Virginia Satir. She focused a lot on communication, and she believed that everybody communicates kind of differently, and the communication styles that she named or listed were placating, blaming, computing, distracting, and congruent. So for the placators or the placating communication style, those were the people pleasers, the ones who don't want any kind of conflict. They just kind of go along with what everybody wants. The blamers, she kind of viewed as very self-righteous, never taking responsibility, always accusing or blaming other people for what was going on. The computing kind of communication, she viewed as emotionally detached, and very like reason-minded, logical, maybe like over-intellectual. And then for the distracting, those were people who were very unfocused, not really able to pay attention to kind of what's going on. And because of that, those were like the dysfunctional communication styles. But the congruent communication style was the functional, style that was the goal. So for congruent, those are people who are genuine, they're open, they're authentic, and they're able to communicate effectively within the family system. So techniques that she used was a lot of role playing, family sculpting, like guided contemplations, things like that. And she believed in a change model or a growth model, and that there had to be a little bit of chaos and stress in order for the family to grow and for them to accept a new way of doing things. So she believed that people are able to grow through stress, and that stress is sometimes a necessary thing, because without that stress, without that kind of chaos within the system, then people become complacent and they just keep doing the same things that they've been doing. Also had 4 assumptions that she kind of brought into every counseling relationship. She believed that people have the potential to grow, they are capable of growing and developing and transforming. She believed that these people have the resources that they need to grow and develop. She also believed that everyone and everything in the family system is connected and influenced by each other. And lastly, she believed that the counselor themselves is more important than the techniques that they use. So the relationship that the counselor has with the family and the family unit is more important than the techniques that they bring into the counseling sessions. And lastly, one of her main goals was to help clients increase their self-worth, and that sense of nurturing within the family unit. Next, we're going to go into the systems theories, and for this one, the main person is Bowen, and he believed that clients were really striving for like a balance between togetherness and separateness. So a balance between that sense of community and belonging, but also being an individual and kind of separate from the group. Bowen is one of the more well-known family therapists. Something that most people know from him is the genogram. That's something I'm sure you had to do like in your grad program. I know I had to do one. And it really looked at the relationships and dynamics between everybody in the family. But we'll get to that in a minute. So Bowen also believed that anxiety is a major drive in life, and that it is one of these things that clients eventually will have to work through. He also believed that clients have to work towards finding a balance between their emotional guidance systems and reasoning guidance systems. So being able to make decisions not solely based on emotion and not solely based on reasoning, but having like a happy little medium and being able to use both. He had like 8 major concepts. I'm really just going to focus on the main 2 that are kind of the most well-known: differentiation of self and triangulation. In differentiation, the goal is really to be able to use those emotional and reasoning guidance systems effectively. So in somebody who is like poorly differentiated, they are kind of overly dependent on other people. They might conform to whatever the group around them is doing. They might practice a lot of like group think. They're really just unable to separate themselves from the group. But somebody who is differentiated is more able to handle criticism, rejection. They're more able to separate themselves from the group and become that kind of individual. They're able to really use that reasoning and emotional guidance systems in a truly effective way. Also kind of rated people on a scale of 1 to 100 for their level of differentiation. 1 being very poor, 100 being extremely high, and being that high is rare. He believed that the average was around 60, and that most people, they stay at their their level of differentiation that they were when they left home. So yeah, so differentiation is being able to really be truly comfortable with yourself, with being an individual, while being able to function effectively still in society and in those kind of group settings. Whew. Okay. Next is triangulation. And triangulation looks at two people's relationship, and often when there is like stress or something like that, there is like a third party that's kind of brought in to relieve the stress or solve some kind of problem. So there's functional triangles and dysfunctional triangles. In functional triangles, the third party helps kind of solve the problem. But in dysfunctional triangles, it doesn't help solve the problem. It kind of exacerbates it, it keeps it there, it does not resolve anything. So there's actually like a really good example that I got for a triangle. I was watching TV and I was watching This Is Us. And so if you don't watch the show, I'm not gonna spoil anything, but so Kate and Toby are married, right? And they have a child. Now, Kate and Toby, their marriage is a little rough. It's not in the best spot. There's a lot of arguments, a lot of fighting, and their child hears them fighting. So when the child heard them fighting, they kind of knocked something over or did something to get the parents' attention, because when the parents were focused on the child, the problems went away. The problems were not solved, but the parents stopped arguing. So that is kind of common in parent-child triangles, the child doing something or trying to do something to make the parents happier. So another example from This Is Us would be like Rebecca, her husband died. So Rebecca, Jack, they were married. Jack died, so to step up one of the kids, Randall kind of filled that role of the dad. He filled Jack's role, and as a child was very supportive of his mom, was always there whenever he needed her. So he kind of helped solve the problem of his father passing away. So those are kind of triangles in like a parent-child dynamic. If you want one without like a parent-child, say they have two people who aren't good at communicating. It's like somebody comes over, you don't know what to talk about. So what do? You turn on the TV. The TV is that third party that takes away the awkwardness and the uncomfortableness. So those are just some examples of triangles. So going back to genograms, these really look at family patterns, family history. They take into account differentiation levels, how anxiety presents itself in the family. And this is looking at like 3 generations. So you, your parents, and your grandparents. And it also can be helpful to kind of look at like those transgenerational issues. So if you see like an issue that was present between your grandmother and your mom, and you see that same issue between your mom and you, like that's something that a genogram can show. Those transgenerational issues, transgenerational trauma, things like that. Next, we're going to do structural family therapy, and the major structural family therapist is Minuchin. And he focused heavily on improving the interactions between family members. He believed that dysfunction creates stress, and stress creates mental health problems. So the goal was to improve those communication, improve relationships, and improve the way that the family unit is communicating with each other. The techniques that he used to do this were family mapping, and family mapping is different than the genogram. So family mapping, it looks at your age, gender, relationship to each other in the family. It also observes like behaviors, the family hierarchy or structure, and each individual that's in family therapy makes their own map. And what you'll find a lot of times is that people view things differently. So the parent's map might be very different than the child's map. Siblings might have different maps, whatever the case might be. And then, so after you do the family mapping, the therapist typically observes the family in order to kind of hypothesize what the issues might be. So they might observe them like within session, they might observe them at home, and that really helps them get a better idea of the relationships and interactions between family members. And then other techniques that they might use are joining, and this really helps to kind of build that therapeutic relationship, to build the trust between the family and the therapist. They might do some boundary marking, some role playing, some like reframing exercises. And so this form of therapy is used a lot when there has been a change in the family structure. So whether that is like divorce, a parent passed away, a sibling passed away, separation, remarriage, whatever has changed the dynamic and the structure of the family, this is when this technique or theory would mostly be used. We're almost done. So next we're going to do strategic family therapy, and this is a more brief form of therapy, and you'll typically see this used in families where a child might have behavioral issues. So this is, like I said, it's brief, it is directive, it is task oriented, and so some of the techniques that might be used are, again, joining to help create that bond, that relationship between the therapist and family, tracking or diagnosing, some like restructuring within the family, and paradoxical tasks are a really big one. So paradoxical tasks, I'm struggling, might be escalating stress or asking someone to do the opposite of what they might think to do, right? So, and like escalating stress, that might be if you have two siblings who are arguing all the time, or a parent and a child who are constantly arguing. You're gonna tell them, okay, go home and argue for like 30 minutes. Go home and argue for 10 minutes and see how that feels, and see what happens when you do that. And by kind of prescribing them to do the symptom more, it really makes them think about why they're doing it. And it's just a good way to kind of mix things up, I feel like, especially if you have given them so many different resources and tasks and homework, and it's something that they have been very resistant to, or they say just isn't working for them, then sometimes you really do just need to try something completely different, and something that might be a little off the wall, but still is evidence-based. Some other things might be recreating communication channels, kind of manipulating the space a little bit. So oftentimes in family therapy, everybody sits in the same spot every time. If you manipulate the space, you're trying to get them to move in different spaces, just to kind of, again, switch things up, play on the relationships a little bit more, and see what is effective and what works for that family. You can also do some reframing, some unbalancing. So in unbalancing, the therapist kind of joins the family and might take on like a more authoritative role to, again, unbalance that relationship or that dynamic that is typically seen within that family unit. Okay, and lastly, we have social constructivists or social constructivism. And so therapists who follow this belief or this theory believe that people do not share a common reality. Everybody's experience is different, right? And they believe that what we believe to be true about the world really depends on our social relationships, our culture, the society that we live in. And one of the things that they strive to do is look at the symptoms that are being presented in a different view. So they believe that symptoms that are present in relationships are due to like the social rules or laws of the culture or group that the relationship lives in. So by changing the way that they view either the rules or their symptoms, and they're able to kind of like relieve some of that stress. Now I'm going to be very honest. This like theory for me was kind of challenging to grasp, and it still is. It was just one of those things that my brain was really struggling to wrap itself around. But those are the major kind of players in family therapy. Again, if you feel like I didn't cover something that I should have covered, let me know. If you feel like this was helpful, give it a little thumbs up. If you want to see like more review videos, let me know. And I'm gonna kind of switch gears a little bit because like I said, I'm having some thoughts and some ideas for some future videos. But I am thinking that I'm going to obviously do a couple more of these review videos for the NCE, but I am also working on getting dually licensed in a couple states, the previous state that I was residing in and the one that I'm in now. And it is a challenging process. And so I'm thinking of doing like a separate video on just talking about that process, kind of outlining what it is that you'll probably need to do, because it's a lot. And I wish I would have had more resources to help me through the process, because it's been very stressful, very challenging, and just a lot in general. So that's something that I'm going to do. And yeah, I hope you found this video helpful. If you did, like I said, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel, let me know what other kind of videos that you want to see, and I will see y'all next time.